Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Welcome to Model Building. In this program, I'm going to install DCC and sound into two N-scale locomotives that I painted in a previous episode. Last time we saw how I repainted two N-scale locomotives, an Atlas GP7 and SD7, and a Microtrains caboose for my fictitious North Coast Railroad. The caboose is done, but I left the shells off the engines. While I have the locomotives apart, I thought it would be a good time to add sound. My goals for this episode are to install sound in the Atlas GP7, install sound in the Atlas SD7, and tune up and speed match both locomotives. The Loksound 5 Micro DCC direct decoder for Atlas locomotives is wider in the middle than the Digitrax board it's replacing. Apparently this decoder is designed to fit Atlas locomotives made after 2016. My models are older than that, so I'm going to have to modify the frames. As I was in the process of shooting this video, Loksound announced a new Loksound 5 Micro DCC decoder for Atlas legacy locomotives. Using one of those might eliminate the need for the frame modifications that I'm going to be doing in this video. I'll need to grind some material from both frame halves to make room for the decoder. I've determined that I'll need to remove some material between these marks. I'm using a fiber-reinforced cutting wheel on my motor tool. After some trial and error, I ended up taking material here and here. This is not the drop-in installation that I was hoping for, but the decoder does fit now. The motor contact pads don't have slots in them like the old decoder board did. I don't want to leave it to chance and just hope that the motor contact strips will end up in the right place. I've clipped the leads to the motor. I've cut some short lengths of wire and I'm soldering connections between the motor and the decoder. I'm attaching the included speaker wires at the same time. Kapton tape is good for insulation, especially at N-scale since it's very thin. There's very little room to remove material in these tiny frames. The best options for speaker placement would be to cut out some space in the fuel tank area or mount the speaker between the decoder and the frame above one of the trucks. I don't like to use the fuel tank area as it reduces the locomotive weight and the speaker magnets tend to pick up junk from the track. I can't fit the enclosures that come with the speakers above the trucks though, so I'll need to modify them or make something new. Even without an enclosure, there isn't much room for a speaker in the GP7. I'm going to take the locomotive apart again and remove a little material from the frame. I'll use my motor tool. Then I'll clean up the cut with the file. The back of the frame is now the same height as the part over the gears. I'm using a 9x16mm sugar cube speaker in both this model and the SD7. There isn't much room for an enclosure, but there is a small amount of airspace near the speaker face. I've put a piece of O20 styrene over the speaker face to seal this area. Even this small airspace is enough to improve the speaker tone and volume. I've also put some Kapton tape over the back of the speaker as a precaution since it touches the bottom of the decoder. It's a little tight, but the shell fits. The SD7 has a little more room in it since it's longer, but I'll still need to remove some material on the sides. Like I did with the GP7, I made marks with a Sharpie. I'll need to grind the frame between the marks. Once again, I'm using a motor tool for the rough cutting. I'll follow up with a file. This is what the frame looks like after. I had to be careful not to remove too much material around the motor mount holes. As with the GP7, I used wires between the motor and the decoder. It took some doing to put the mechanism back together as this one has an even tighter fit than the GP7. I had an issue when I tried to use my Lok programmer to program the decoder. The engine made noise like a DC engine on a DCC track and the LEDs on the decoder flashed rapidly. I couldn't program it. After some trial and error, I realized that there was a short between the bottom of the decoder and the frame. I put a layer of Kapton tape between the decoder and the frame in this area. This is a good example of why it's best to test a model on a programming track before trying it out on a live DCC track. I might have destroyed my decoder if I'd done that. I was still worried, but with the tape installed, I was able to program the decoder normally. Everything seems okay. The shell fits better on the SD7. Loksound has a number of sound sets available with EMD 567 prime mover sounds. For the GP7, I chose SO599, which says it was recorded from a GP7. Just for the sake of variety, for the SD7 I chose set SO711. This one says it was recorded from an F7A. The Lok programmer will want to convert these sounds for the Loksound 5 micros that I used in these locomotives. After doing that, I had to resave them. I keep a saved sound file for each of my sound-equipped locomotives. It saves not only the sounds, but also all of the CV settings, including lighting outputs and motor control. This is very useful if I ever need to restore a decoder that's been reset. Before I attempt to speed match the models, I want to tweak the motor control CV settings so that the locomotives start and run as smoothly as possible. Loksound has an auto-tune feature, which is sometimes a good starting point. Set CV54 to 0, then exit programming and press F1. The the locomotive will run for a moment then stop. Sometimes the auto-tune works well and sometimes it doesn't, but it worked really well for these two locomotives. They run smoothly throughout the entire speed range. I like to speed match all of my locomotives to each other so that I can run them in any combination. For today I'm going to use this Kato SD70M as my standard locomotive. I'll match both North Coast engines to it. I'll use ops mode on my Digitrax system to tweak CV2, 5, and 6 while the locomotive is on the main. Any DCC system which is capable of programming on the main should be able to do this. CV2, the minimum speeds, should be set to the lowest value that allows the locomotive to run steadily at speed step 1. For both of my engines, I ended up setting CV2 to 2. I put the SD70 into a consist with my GP7 as the lead unit. Then I'll run them at full throttle, or 99 on my Digitrax controller. I'll adjust CV5, the maximum speed, until the GP7 is moving at the same speed as the SD70. When that's done, I'll set the throttle to half, or 50 on my Digitrax controller. Then I'll repeat the process with CV6, the mid-range speed. I like a nice linear speed curve, so CV6 should end up being somewhere around half the value in CV5. I also like to match the momentum settings. CV3 is the momentum for acceleration, and CV4 is the momentum for deceleration. I'll run both engines at full throttle, then quickly turn the knob to 0. If the GP7 stops before the SD70, it needs more momentum, so I'll increase the value in CV4. If it stops later, then it has too much momentum, and I'll need to decrease the value in CV4. Some engines take a second to get going, so to adjust the acceleration, I like to start with the throttle set at 1 and let both engines start moving. Then I rapidly advance the throttle to 99. If the GP7 gets up to speed quicker than the SD70, it needs more momentum, so I need to increase the value in CV3. If it takes longer to get up to speed, then I need to decrease the value in CV3. I found that after doing all of this, I can consist my locomotives in any combination and they will play nicely with each other at any speed. Once the models are dialed in, I put each model back on the loc programmer and read the values into the project file for that engine. Then I save the file. All of the new motor control settings will be saved along with the sound and everything else. And that's it. Just for fun, I put both North Coast engines into a consist and added the caboose. Sometimes some cutting and filing is necessary to add sound to a model. Especially in N-scale, be sure to proceed slowly and carefully to avoid damaging the mechanism. Even a tiny enclosure will give a speaker more volume and better sound. An enclosure is just an airtight space that surrounds one side of the speaker. Admittedly, these models aren't very loud. I tend to turn my sound-equipped models down anyway, though, and the sound of these two diesels is in proportion to their size. When I was young, I never even dreamed that N-scale locomotives would run this well, much less have sounds. N has come a long way. As I was running these engines around on our Siren Creek layout, I realized that they operate as well as any of my HO scale models. So now we have a pair of diesels for the standard gauge portion of our N-scale Siren Creek project layout. I'm really happy with the way these two turned out. Maybe in the future I'll do a little more detailing and weathering, but for now I'm going to call them done. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.